What's going on with you, Zach? I know there's not a lot happening, although there's always stuff happening, especially with IU basketball recruiting. People are waiting, wondering what's going on. There's obviously the kid from Anthony Walker on campus for a visit now, but he's another big from Miami, but it'll still be a nice get, probably for Mike Woodson, adding a veteran, defined veteran who has tons of experience to his front court. But still needing the wing and the shooter to score or whatnot. But it's the portal is still open. There's still guys going into the portal. So I don't think that there's any reason for fans to panic.
Yeah, I think with Walker specifically, obviously you look at his profile and it is hard to, see a path to him being a major contributor. But I think one thing you do remind people is, listen, you got 3 scholarships open, and you need depth. You need experience. If I'm not mistaken, Walker only has 1 year. I was looking at his profile on the Miami website. He only has 1 year left. Right. So, that's not a scholarship you're pinning down long-term if you do wind up taking him. You need depth, and you need depth. I mean, listen, I forget who, I think it was Liverpool's manager talking about they had a real injury problem earlier in the season. He was talking about how bad, how below standard training sessions were, practice sessions were. He just said it's because we can't put enough players on the field to compete with each other. We have too many players that are injured. And, you forget that depth is important sometimes just for quality practice, for quality workouts. You can bring guys in that may not do much for you on game day, but may have real value to you behind the scenes. So, I know that people want bigger fish, and to your point, the portal is still open. Players have until May 11th to enter the portal. That's not counting graduate transfers. They are not beholden to that deadline. They can go in whenever they want. And the players that are in the portal, at least in theory, can come out whenever they want. But you have to be in by May 11th. And I think the next shoe to drop here is likely going to be the players that have been in the draft, that entered the draft knowing there was a good chance they weren't going to stay in the draft, but they wanted to go through the pre-draft process. And whether they knew it when they entered it, which I think a lot of them probably did, or they came to this conclusion, over time, those players eventually, I shouldn't say of course, but those players will eventually plan on withdrawing from the draft, but entering the transfer portal. And I think that's where maybe you're going to see the next raft of big names that Indiana might target for some of these last spots. And then, of course, they've also set their visit with Mackenzie Mbako, the top 10 prospect who had been committed to Duke. So the point is, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week too, there are still plenty of irons in the fire. There are still plenty of, plenty of options for Indiana to pursue here. The margin for error is undeniably slimmer. It just hasn't been eliminated yet.
And I've talked at length about developing talent that they currently have. You've got Caleb Banks, CJ Gunn on the bench that are both very good players. That CJ, if you look at his numbers last year, his shooting from a shooting standpoint, they're abysmal, but he's not. He's a good shooter. That's just time and experience, I think, because he shot 80% from the free throw line. Caleb Banks, that dude, I'm probably expecting more from him than anyone, just because it seemed like when he did play, man, he made the most of his minutes. He tried to grab rebounds, score, whatever it took. He was a very active but controlled in his play. So I think that he is someone that sees a great opportunity because his position is the one that is in need. And so there's no better opportunity than being not the incumbent, but you're in place already. And I think Indiana fans should look forward to a huge jump by Caleb Banks.
And I think you have to consider, and listen, this is the portal always kind of, I think, magnifies this and sort of almost like hypersensitizes every, I don't know if you want to say step or every just sort of piece of this, but I think there's also a player like Caleb Banks and what you're doing in the portal right now. That's part of the calculus a head coach has to sort of navigate in terms of, essentially, do I take a player that might get in the way of the progress of another player, or do I put my faith in a player who, like Caleb Banks, we saw some real moments of promise last season. You talk to anyone around him in high school, they think his ceiling is enormous, that he's just beginning to understand how good he can be, that he can shoot, he can handle the ball. We saw that in high school. We saw it in AAU. And so if you're Mike Woodson, you're in this spot where, on the one hand, if you recruit over a player like that or a player like CJ Gunn, they may enter the portal and you would understand why. On the other hand, there's always the risk of basically putting your chips in the middle on younger players and players that maybe still have a lot of polishing to do. I'm with you on Banks in particular. I think Caleb Banks can be very, very good. And I think that it's not hard to convince me of a world where Banks is a starter and a genuine contributor for Indiana next season. That doesn't mean they don't need to go get more help in the portal. That doesn't mean there aren't still pieces they need to add. But I think that is the other sort of piece of this roster equation, that because Indiana's roster has been so decimated, 7 players gone through graduation, the draft, the portal, it sort of feels like there's a temptation to feel like there's nothing left there, when of course there obviously is. If you're Indiana, you just have to be, really sort of studious and diligent about developing what you have and filling in the holes where you don't.
Absolutely, and that's the only thing left for them to do is with those a few open spots. And like I said, we've talked about the portal. Not only is it open until May 11th. There. You mentioned the guys that are not even in it that are going to be, and it may be some of them may be better than any option that has been in there yet. Indiana seems confident in what they're doing, and but if they don't land someone that is what we would consider special, where is this team right now, do you think?
No, I mean, I think first of all, it's not deep enough. Again, just going, it's literally in a situation where you would need every single player you have to be healthy to be able to scrimmage 5-on-5 with scholarship players alone. And of course, we've also seen a couple walk-ons go out the door. Walk-ons, again, I know that they don't, you don't see a ton of them on game day. They are also important, and having experienced walk-ons is typically part of having a productive roster. So there's a depth piece to it that they don't have that they need. There's obviously the 3-point shooting, I think is going to be a bit of a concern. Even if they can add, 1 or 2 pieces in the portal, you're still maybe going to wonder whether they are going to be able to make shots at a high volume level, better basically than what they did last season. And if you don't add anybody, then that concern only becomes sort of magnified or exacerbated. And I also still think, and maybe they're targeting a player like Anthony Walker, thinking he can help with this. I still think there's also a need for some wing defense, if nothing else, just some athleticism and some length that you can throw at, players. And I know these are players that aren't in the Big Ten now, but they have been in the Big Ten recently. Players like Chris Murray or Johnny Davis or Ron Harper Jr., that has been a profile of player that has, frankly, had a lot of success in the Big Ten in the last few years, that Indiana has really not had an answer for defending recently, and that's got to change as well. And again, maybe a player like Anthony Walker helps with that if they wind up, if he winds up committing to Indiana. But it's just kind of, there are still pieces of the puzzle, pronounced pieces of the puzzle that need to be put into place for me.
Absolutely, and hopefully they will get that lined up as the AAU season has already started. Zach, the kids are not even out of high school now. I thought that this usually it didn't start until at least they got out of school.
No,
and now
the
they're
joke was
already playing.
There'd always be at least 1 or 2 AAU games a year where kids wouldn't make it because of prom. So that was always the running joke.
Well, we've already had 1 week of play, and now this week, the EYBL tour is out in Phoenix. 3SSB from Adidas is down in Texas. Indiana Elite. Man, they've really loaded up their team, by the way. I had someone comment asking the other day, why is it still called Indiana Elite? Because it's got guys from Kentucky and Illinois on it, et cetera, et cetera. But that team with Brandon, with Jalen Harrelson, Trent Sisley, Flory Badunga, Raleigh Burgess, Travis Perry, guys like that, they'll be playing down in Texas, and that's a good core of, and that's a group of IU targets right there. I mean, half that team has offers from Indiana.
Yeah, no, and I don't know the Indiana Elite thing. I mean, Indiana Elite has had kids from Ohio in the past and has pulled kids from Louisville in the past. That's not wholly new. I mean, that's just
right.
That's just part of the rhythm of this thing. But it's also a reminder to your point that there will always be AAU programs close to home, and this is, I mean, irrespective of where the program is, who the coach is, whatever. This has always felt like one of Indiana's great strengths is that there will always be talent close to home that can, contribute to building a strong college basketball program. Indiana Elite is probably the most. Indiana Elite and Spice are maybe the two most recognizable pieces of that. Some other programs have kind of come and gone and risen and fallen, but there's always going to be guys around here for Indiana to be able to build with. It's just a matter of getting them in the door.